The poker chips were still warm in my hand when the old man slid the deed across the table. I remember the sound it made, that papery whisper against the rough pine. The saloon was loud, smoke thick enough to chew, and every man at that table thought I'd just won the biggest pot of my life. 300 acres of New Mexico rangeland, a creek that never ran dry, and whatever else old Harlan Briggs was fool enough to throw in when he'd had too much whiskey and too much pride. That's everything, Harlan said. He didn't even look ashamed, just tired, like a man who'd been carrying something heavy for years and finally got to set it down. The land, the cattle, and the girl. I thought I'd misheard him. I beg your pardon, he leaned forward. His breath smelled like sour mash and something rotting underneath. I said the girl. She comes with the property. Part of it, far as I'm concerned. I looked around the table. 3 other men. Not one of them flinched. Not one of them thought a single thing was wrong with what he'd just said. That was the spring of 1871, and I was 29 years old. And I'd seen a lot of ugly things in this country. I'd ridden through the aftermath of battles I had no business witnessing. I'd seen what desperation does to a man. But something about the casual way Harlan Briggs said, the girl, like she was a fence post or a water trough, that settled in my chest like a stone I couldn't cough up. Where is she? I asked. And I still don't know exactly why I asked it that way. Instead of saying there's no girl, a person is not a wager. Out back, he said. Been there 6 months. Bought her off a trader coming down from Santa Fe. She don't speak much English, keeps trying to run. He almost smiled. She won't get far. I picked up my winnings, folded the deed, and I walked out the back door of the Silverhorn Saloon in Cimarron, New Mexico, into a night so full of stars it almost hurt to look at. She was sitting on the ground beside a water barrel, her wrists bound with rope that had already gone dark from rubbing against her skin. Her hair was black as creek water at midnight, loose and tangled, half covering her face. She was wearing a dress that wasn't hers. Too big, pale calico, the kind of thing you'd put on someone when you wanted them to look like something they weren't. She heard me coming and her whole body changed. Every muscle went tight. Her head came up, and she looked at me with eyes that I can only describe as ready, not afraid. Ready. Like she'd already decided what she would do if I was another thing to survive. I stopped about 6 feet away. I know that sounds like an odd thing to notice the distance, but I noticed it. I didn't want her to feel cornered. I'm not going to hurt you, I said, which is probably exactly what every person who'd hurt her had also said. She didn't respond, just watched me. I crouched down so I wasn't standing over her, pulled out my pocket knife, and I held it out, handle first. You can take this, I said slowly, and cut yourself free. And then you can go wherever you want to go. For a long moment, nothing. Then her hand came out, slow, watchful, and she took the knife. She didn't cut the rope right away. First she looked at me. A long, measuring look, like she was reading, something written in a language most people couldn't see. Then she cut the rope. She handed the knife back to me, handle first, same way I'd offered it. I hadn't expected that. She stood up. She was tall, maybe 5'7", which wasn't common for a woman in those days or any days. She rubbed her wrists and looked at the darkness beyond the back fence, and then she looked at me again. Where would you go? I asked, not to stop her, genuinely asking. She tilted her head slightly. Do you have people, family, somewhere to go back to? Something moved across her face. It wasn't sadness exactly, it was more like a door closing. I'm Eli Calloway, I said. I just won the land that fool in there wagered. I'm going out to it tomorrow, and I'm going to need someone who knows this territory, because I am profoundly lost in New Mexico. I stood up. I'm not asking you to work for me. I'm not asking you anything. But if you don't have somewhere to be tonight, I've got a bedroll and a spare horse and a fire I won't let go out. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, in English that was clipped and precise, almost formal, my name is Kaya. And that was how it started. She rode better than me. That was clear by the second hour. We left Cimarron before dawn, and she sat that horse like she'd been born on one, which I later learned she essentially had. She was Western Apache, from a band that had lived in these mountains for longer than New Mexico had been a territory, longer than the United States had been a country, longer than any map I'd ever seen had existed. Her family had been scattered by the same tides of violence and displacement that had been crashing over this land for decades. Her mother had died when she was 12. Her father had been taken by soldiers. She'd been surviving on her own for 4 years when a trader near Santa Fe had offered her food and a roof, and had meant something else entirely. She didn't tell me all of this at once. She told it to me in pieces over days, the way you feed bread to a bird, a little at a time, watching to see if you're safe. I told her things too. I told her about Ohio, where I'd grown up, and how the flat land there had felt like a ceiling pressing down on me from below, which probably doesn't make sense, but it was true. I told her about how I'd come west at 23 with $4 and a mule named Prudence who had absolutely no prudential instincts whatsoever. I told her about the war, some of it, the parts I could still say out loud. She's listened. She asked questions I didn't expect, not the surface ones but the underneath ones. What did you want the land to be? She asked once about the ranch. Before you even had it. What did you picture? I thought about it. Quiet, I said finally. I wanted it to be quiet, and mine. And maybe, I don't know, something I built. She nodded like that made sense. My people say a man who wants to own the land doesn't understand the land, she said. Then she looked at me sideways, and there was something almost like humor in it. But you seem like someone who could learn. The ranch was rough. 300 acres of high desert grass, a creek lined with cottonwoods, a house that Harlan Briggs had started and apparently abandoned when it got to the hard parts. Half a roof, no floor to speak of. A fireplace that worked, which was the only thing that worked. I stood in the doorway and looked at it and thought, this is everything I own in the world. Kaya walked around the outside of it, looking at the way it sat on the land, looking at where the creek ran, looking at things I didn't know how to look at yet. The house faces the wrong way, she said. Should face east. But that can't be changed now. She put her hand on the stone of the fireplace, feeling something I couldn't feel. The foundation is good, the rest is just work. Just work, I repeated. You're afraid of work? I'm afraid of this much work. She picked up a board from the pile Harlan had apparently left when he'd given up. She handed it to me. Start somewhere, she said. We worked for 3 weeks before I understood what was happening to me. I mean, I think some part of me knew from the first night, outside that saloon, when she handed the knife back to me handle first. But I'm a slow understander sometimes, particularly when it comes to things I'm not supposed to want. Because she was extraordinary. Not in a way that was easy to describe to another person. She wasn't just beautiful, though she was, in a way that the whole landscape was beautiful. In a way that made you stop what you were doing and just acknowledge that you were in the presence of something that had a right to exist independent of you. She was also the sharpest person I'd ever been around. She knew things about plants that sounded like magic until she explained the logic behind them. And then it was just knowledge, just centuries of accumulated careful observation. She could read the sky and tell you what the next 3 days of weather would be. And she was right more often than the almanac. She could fix things, mechanical things, structural things, in ways that made me feel like I'd been approaching every problem backwards my whole life. And she laughed sometimes, when she thought something was genuinely funny, not as a performance but as a response, spontaneous and full. And it made me feel like I'd won something I hadn't even known I was competing for. But she was also careful with herself. She kept a distance that I respected, that I understood, that I would never have tried to cross, because I knew where she'd been. I knew what had been done to her, and what the world had decided she was worth. And I knew that whatever I felt didn't give me any claim on anything. So I built the floor, I fixed the roof. I rode the fence lines and learned the land, and I was careful too. The trouble came as trouble tends to from outside. A man named Aldrich, rancher from about 12 miles east, big operation, more money than sense, the kind of man who wanted things not because he needed them, but because having them meant someone else didn't. He came out to see me in early June, 2 months after I'd arrived, wearing a good coat in bad weather and smiling the way men smile when they've already decided something. Heard you took Briggs's place, he said. He looked around the yard, taking in the repaired house, the kitchen garden that Kaya had put in, the fence I'd rebuilt along the south pasture. His eyes landed on Kaya, who was working near the water barrel, and stayed there. Heard some other things too. What other things? I said. About your situation here. He said it with a particular kind of smile that I want to describe as knowing, but knowing doesn't quite capture it. It was more like assuming, like he'd already made up a story and was just checking to see if I'd agree with it. You can say what you mean, I said, or you can leave. I'm not particular which. He shifted. The smile didn't go away. I mean to buy this land from you, Calloway. I'll give you a fair price, more than fair. And I'll take everything on it off your hands, so you can move on to the next thing. Everything on it. The way he said it. I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about what it would feel like to say yes. The money would be real. The path forward would be simple. And the alternative was fighting a man with resources and connections in a territory where I was still new and still unknown. No, I said. He waited as if maybe I'd keep talking and explain myself. I didn't. You're making a mistake, he said. Probably not my last one. He left. But men like Aldrich don't leave for long. Kaya had heard all of it. She was still at the water barrel, but she wasn't moving. He'll come back, she said. It wasn't a question, yes. With more men, most likely. She turned around and looked at me. You said no because of the land, she said. Or because of something else. I looked at her. The late afternoon light was hitting the cottonwoods along the creek, and they were gold and silver and moving. And she was standing in front of them and I said, because of something else. She was quiet for a moment. Ely. I know, I said. You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for anything. That's not what I was going to say. I waited. I was going to say, she stopped, started again. The careful way she did when the words mattered. I was going to say that I have been in this territory for 4 years. And in that time not one person has handed me a knife and stepped back. She paused. You are strange to me. That's fair. I mean it as a good thing. Something in my chest did something I'm not going to try too hard to describe. All right, I said. I'm not ready, she said. For anything. I don't know if I will be. There are things that were taken from me that I don't know if I'll get back. Do you understand what I mean? Yes. But I'm not leaving. I looked at her. Okay. And I think you should know, she said, with that same sideways thing that was almost humor, that you're going to need a lot of help with the south fence. You did the posts completely wrong. Aldrich came back in July, with 3 men and a paper from somewhere that he said gave him prior claim on the water rights of the creek, which was creative, I'll say that. The paper was probably real and probably wrong, and would take time we didn't have to disprove in any court. We'd had 3 weeks to prepare. I will not bore you with the details of what we did, but I will say that Kaya knew things about this land. The draws and the ridges and the dry arroyos, and where a man on horseback could be seen from a mile away and where he couldn't. That made Aldrich's 3 hired men feel like they were riding through a landscape that had quietly decided not to cooperate with them. Nobody got shot, I want to say that clearly. But by the end of it, Aldrich's men had lost 2 horses to a box canyon they hadn't seen coming, and Aldrich himself had ended up, through a series of events that still make me smile, sitting in the middle of the creek in July, fully dressed, watched by a rancher and an Apache woman who were both very carefully not laughing. The water rights paper, Kaya said to him, very pleasantly, appears to be getting wet. He left. He didn't come back. The night after Aldrich left for good, we sat outside on the ground by the fire pit, which is where we often ended up in the evenings, because the house was still a little rough and the outside was glorious. The sky in New Mexico at night is not like any other sky. It's too many stars. It's an embarrassment of stars, like whoever made it was overcompensating for something. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Do you remember what you said? That you wanted quiet and something yours and something you built?" I remember. Is it that? I thought about the past 4 months. The floor and the roof. The fence post she'd told me I'd done wrong and she was right. The kitchen garden and the horses and the creek in the morning last week when I'd woken up before dawn and gone outside and heard. Nothing, just wind and creek water. Yes, I said. It is, she nodded. She was pulling up grass with her fingers, not impatiently, just something to do with her hands. I want to tell you something, she said, and I'm going to say it plainly because I've learned that plain is better. All right, I think I am building something too, she said. Here, I didn't expect it, but I think that's what this is. I looked at her. The firelight was doing what firelight does, making everything look like something worth keeping. Then build it, I said. Stay as long as it takes. Stay longer. Chick looked at me. Something in her face that I had been watching carefully for months, some last carefully maintained distance, shifted, not disappeared, just shifted, like a door that had been closed deciding to stand open an inch. She leaned toward me, slowly, giving me time to understand what was happening, and then she leaned her head against my shoulder, and I put my arm around her, and she let out a breath that seemed like it had been held for years. We stayed that way for a long time. The stars did their embarrassing abundance overhead. The creek talked to itself the way creeks do. The horses moved in the dark beyond the fence. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Some things you ruin by naming them. Later, in the years that came after, there were many years, and most of them were good, and some were hard in the way that real life is hard, not cinematically but genuinely, in ways that required showing up again the next day. I thought sometimes about that poker game, about old Harlan Briggs sliding a deed across a table and calling a person a prize. He'd meant it as a cruelty. Or maybe not even that. Maybe he hadn't thought about it enough to mean anything. Maybe she was just a line item to him, the girl. She comes with the property, but I won that hand. I want to be clear about that. I held the cards and I won. What I won was 300 acres of high desert grass, and a creek that never ran dry, and a house with a wrong-facing door, and a south fence line that I had done completely wrong. And a woman who handed a knife back to me handle first, in the dark behind a saloon. Who taught me to read weather and land and the underneath of things. Who built something here, in this difficult, difficult country, something real, something that was hers and mine and neither of ours and both of ours. That is what fortune looks like when you're old enough to recognize it. Not a deed, not a pot of chips. Someone who chose to stay.